proudly sponsored by the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation. I'm Ruth Baum-Biggis, and today we're going to talk about a topic that, while in raw numbers, is not huge, but oh so important because it impacts people, and anything that impacts people is important. We're going to talk about rare diseases and a couple of organizations here in Kansas City that deal with rare diseases and their leadership who are involved in Rare Disease Day, which is February 29th.
Yes, the rarest day of the year.
And that voice might sound familiar to you. That is Michelle Davis, who's been here a number of times, but the last time was with the Association of Fundraising Professionals. Well, American too. And then we're also joined with Kelly Ranallo, who is president and founder of RareKC, correct?
That's correct.
And you're also with the Turner Syndrome Global Alliance.
That is correct.
Which is a rare disease.
It is a rare disease.
And I inadvertently skipped Michelle with her rare disease organization that you represent.
Yeah, so I'm the executive director of the International Fibrodysplasia Ossificans Progressiva Association.
And I'm so glad that she said that.
I am as
well. I did that on purpose. What is that? Tell us about that disease and numbers and why that's considered rare.
Absolutely. So we call it FOP for short, so we don't have to say that mouthful of words all the time. But FOP is a disease that is a genetic disease. People are born with it. They have a disease growing in their body where all of the soft tissue from your muscles, cartilage, tendons, ligaments will calcify and become hard bone. And so these individuals essentially become encased in a second skeleton.
Oh my gosh.
And there's only about 900 people diagnosed in the entire world with this disease.
Well, we can put the math together. I would assume 900 makes it rare.
And it actually makes it what we would call ultra rare.
Mm-hmm. Kelly, tell us a little bit about Turner syndrome.
So Turner syndrome, again, just like FOP, it's a genetic disorder. And so whereas Turner syndrome is a little bit different, it's not quite as rare. It actually occurs in about 1 in 2,000 female births because it only affects little girls. It's a genetic disorder in which they actually lose one of their second X's. So if you go back to basic biology of X is female and XY. And so we have, again, a population of girls that many times get overlooked, takes years to get a diagnosis. And it just happens that my daughter actually has this condition.
And how does it manifest itself? What are the symptoms?
So it's a spectrum disorder, which means depending on when the infant loses in embryological development, loses that second X, they can have conditions that are significant, for example, like heart conditions, as well as some neurological, kidney, pretty much every organ is affected by this genetic condition. In fact, it's so significant if it happens early in that embryological development that only 2% of all births actually make it of our girls.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Is there any screening for it?
So there's no newborn screening at this point in time, which is a big challenge in a lot of rare diseases.
I would think so.
It is. You know, ironically, here in Missouri, at least on the Missouri side of the Kansas City area, we are the leader for rare disease newborn screening. We're a little bit behind on the Kansas side, and so we hope to be able to elevate that. Mm-hmm.
That Missouri would take a lead.
They are.
So since we're hanging this on kind of rare disease, define what that means. Is it just by numbers pretty much?
Absolutely. So any disease or disorder that affects fewer than 200,000 people in the United States is considered a rare disease. And of those rare diseases, about 8 in 10 have a genetic component.
So we're talking again genes, which is the hot topic with everything, it seems these days. And you're both working tirelessly, I know, in your respective diseases to fundraise, aware raise, all those good things. RareKC, how did that come into the mix of all of this?
That's a really great question. So after starting the Turner Syndrome Global Alliance, we realized that when you started bringing the community together, that you really could change the outcomes. Earlier diagnosis, better clinical care outcomes, And probably in the rare disease community, one of the most important things is research. It's very difficult to get both the funding as well as the interest of the science community when you're talking about these ultra rare diseases. And so after we partnered with Children's Mercy here in Kansas City, we developed what's called the Great Heights Clinic. So this is a comprehensive coordinated care program for Turner syndrome girls specifically. And over the last 10 years, we've now been able to duplicate that in 38 pediatric hospitals across the United States. And so Kansas City really became the gold standard, the model here. But what I realized is my husband and I, we have 4 children. And our second daughter, Katie, we actually lost to a different rare disease at the age of 5 months.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, thank you. And so, in fact, this is one of the challenges. About 50% of rare diseases are pediatric in nature. And of those 50%, 30% of those children that are affected won't live to see their 5th birthday. And unfortunately, Katie's condition, unrelated to Turner syndrome, she was one of those statistics. And so after we saw the benefit and the need of what bringing a community did for our Turner syndrome global community, we looked back and said, that's great, but if Katie was still alive and she had a different rare disease, that wouldn't have benefited her at all. And so how can we elevate the voice here in Kansas City? Because as Michelle shared and you talked about, rare and our numbers are small, but if you put us together here in the United States, it's 1 in 10. And so that's 30 million people.
That's a lot of people.
More than cancer and AIDS combined. And so you can imagine the impact that the rare disease community could have if we could bring our voice together. And so that really facilitated the launch of RareKC, is how can we bring those small voices that, as you pointed out, are always advocating for awareness and funding. How can we bring that together? And then how can we elevate really the life science community here in Kansas City?
And you say so much of this is genetic. So the hope would be, hey, this is, all of us are probably tied more to genetic than other things. It doesn't make the others any less important, but we got to pay attention. I know we've had cancer organizations on before, and a number of times those that impact children, and you hear from those folks so much. They're making inroads in cancer, but when it comes to pediatric disease in general, and I have a daughter who's a doctor, and she would tell you this as well.
Right.
There's just not the research dollars that are going to make those big things happen. So how do you knock at those doors? That's a big question. And maybe that's where we pull in Rare Disease Day.
Well, yeah, I think that's a big challenge. I think we both understand the challenges when you're trying to raise funds for a specific disease is very challenging. And so one of our initiatives through RareKC is to bring together to the philanthropic community, both here in Kansas City, as well as from globally, to not only raise funds that will support all of the needs, because we have a lot of crossover, but also be able to elevate the voices of the smaller rare disease communities so that they can raise funds for specific rare disease research.
And we do a lot of sharing. I think the thing that's so interesting about this community, there are 7,000 rare diseases.
Right.
There are treatments for about 500.
That's not very many.
So there is so much work to be done. But what we know is that we have so much to learn from each other. So we might each be working in a different disease area, but our challenges around research and finding funding and getting doctors educated and early diagnosis are all very similar. So we come together in collaborative groups like RareKC, or there's a group called Global Genes, or the National Organization of Rare Disorders, and we come together and share resources and we share experiences. It really is that old phrase of, all ships rise. And that's really how we look at things in the rare disease community. We're not holding on to information or not willing to share with one another because we see the devastating impact of whether it's our disease or someone else's disease. We understand what that does to families. Physically, the changes that are happening in a person's body, but also the emotional and the financial impact of rare disease is enormous. And so we want to work together. We come together in groups like RareKC to help each of us solve problems, but to do it together.
Now, with both your organizations, what are we looking at in Kansas City with Turner syndrome? Do you have any numbers that you can put on families that you're aware of here in our metro?
I guess we've never really specifically looked at the numbers, but I know when we created the clinic down at Children's Mercy, when my daughter was first diagnosed at the age of 8.5, we'd go to clinic and it would just be us in the waiting room, just looking around saying, am I ever going to meet somebody else that really understands the shoes that I'm walking in as well as my daughter? Now with the clinic and coordination of clinic, on those days, there's about 60 girls that come from all over the area who are coming together not only to get their coordinated care, but to find a community, to find somebody that they can really connect with, because that is a big challenge, as Michelle said. The psychosocial, emotional support is really important to the rare disease community.
That's got to be very uplifting. How about you, Michelle? Is there a case even in the area?
No, there's not. So 900 people in the world that are diagnosed with the disease. There are several families in Iowa and a few families in St. Louis, but in Kansas City, there aren't even any
Not
families.
anybody directly.
Right, absolutely.
Now, in your organizations, and maybe it hangs with RareKC, so educate us, are there support groups? As you said, Kelly, there's so much, not only for the person going through it, but the family around it that has to help and live and support. So what's available?
I think that's a really great question. We're very fortunate here in Kansas City because there are a lot of great non-for-profit organizations that add support, maybe not specifically that were created for rare disease, but that we can actually connect families with. Our motto is, there's so much work to be done. The last thing we want to do is duplicate what is already here in Kansas City. We have a great community, and so we've been able to connect. There's an organization called Hope Kids here in Kansas City. Great organization that really supports these families and allows not only for them to connect and parents, but for the siblings to connect. Because when a family is impacted by a rare disease, it's the entire family.
Right.
It's just not one child. And so being able to partner with those type of organizations, the Kauffman Foundation has been a fantastic organization here because they allow us to be able to host events here in the great facilities at very little cost, which again is a huge issue for
That's a big issue.
Yes, it is.
We do the same thing. So we were thinking at our organization about the emotional impact of having a chronic disease. And we actually turned to Turning Point here in Kansas City. So they provide emotional support programs and services for people living with chronic disease. And our disease, FOP, is debilitating over your lifetime. And so it's really amazing to me that we were able to partner with this organization. And because we're an international organization, so the International FOP Association works with families from all over the world. On any given day, I might be Google translating a conversation with a family from Egypt or be working with a family in Poland. And we are now able to take this program from Turning Point on resilient living, and we are teaching families around the world how to live with a chronic illness.
I love the collaboration.
We live in a great city.
I mean, that's so important. I was doing a little reading before the show, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought lupus possibly came up as a disease, or there was some conversation in a thread talking about genetics. Maybe that's what it was. And I know, having worked with that organization, the research side of it, it's so hard to get people connected. Tell us about Rare Disease Day. Is that part of the mission there with that designated Rare Day? The leap day of every 4 years?
So, yeah, I mean, it's either on the 29th of February or on off years, it's February 28th. So we hold it as an annual event, and it really is to draw awareness to the fact that people may have a rare disease that you've never heard of, but that there are 7,000 rare diseases, and that 1 in 10. So if you think about your church or your school or your office, it's really easy to come up with multiple people in your world that have rare diseases. And so we want the community to understand the challenges of living with a rare disease. We want them to understand the opportunities that exist in research. And then I think another thing that's important, for example, the research that we're doing in FOP, it has the ability to help other diseases. It has the ability to help osteoporosis and other diseases. So although you're funding this specific rare disease when you give to help us fund a research grant, the opportunities to impact other diseases are really limitless.
I think that's a great point. Here in Kansas City, we are very fortunate. If anybody's been driving downtown, you see the the 9-story pediatric research institute down at Children's Mercy Hospital growing. In there, they have just launched what's called the Genomic Answers for Kids program. This is a philanthropic funded program. One of the biggest challenges when you have a rare disease is actually getting that diagnosis. The average number of years that somebody goes trying to seek out a diagnosis is about 8 to 10 in rare disease because doctors just don't know it. And so this program will offer free genetic testing for kids and families that are referred by their physician to be able to hopefully get an answer sooner so that you can get on a journey and find a pathway, find the connections.
And 95% of rare diseases lack an FDA-approved treatment.
That's correct.
Are a lot of people seeking then treatment outside of the United States?
It doesn't exist
It
anywhere,
just doesn't
generally.
exist.
It just doesn't exist. There's so much to learn about the disease and the basic research that's done to understand the disease. And then you have to go from basic research to therapeutic intervention where you're trying to identify what could actually stop that progression. It's a long process.
So rare diseases are really important for all of us to become more knowledgeable about. You've got RareKC. We have your two organizations. And on February 29th, go out and educate yourself, right?
That's right.
Is there a
Absolutely.
website folks could go to find out all of that good stuff?
Yeah, there's a great website, rarediseaseday.org, where people can find more information about rare diseases. And then on the RareKC website as well.
We have a local one as well.
Thank you both for enlightening us. So folks, get out there, get educated, and come together, and let's tackle this issue.